You know, Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that. But it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolong Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
Two sisters, one a respected TV producer, Jill Blackstone, and the other, Wendy. She was disabled, nearly blind and deaf, and Jill had devoted herself to taking care of Wendy.
Jill was her best friend, her sister, her everything.
But the sister bond was shattered when Wendy and some of the sisters' rescue dogs were found dead in a garage next to a toppled-over barbecue grill. Jill says accidental carbon monoxide poisoning killed everyone. Police do not believe her.
Police arrested Jill Blackstone for the murder of her sister.
Investigators think it was staged to look like an accident.
Who will you believe, especially now that a secret source has come forward with evidence never made public before?
Jill was a good producer. There's no doubt about that. But would she produce murder is the question.
Season 2 of Bad Bad Thing, The Blackstone Sisters, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
I always say, show me a perfect family. I'll show you a family with secrets.
I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
and we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, if you ever see a large dark figure like that of a man but with wings and glowing red eyes, know that doom is coming. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prosecutors. I am your host, Count Brett, and I am joined, as always, by my vampiric co-host, Alice, Mistress of the Dark.
I bring nothing but light to this episode because you guys who are listening on your earbuds or on the radio, not seeing this, do not see what Brett has done for you. He has become Mr. Halloween on this glorious 5th week of October. The creepiest of all weeks. He is here as Dracula.
It is true. And for those of you listening now, it is Halloween, the greatest and darkest of all nights. And we are honored to be here with you for this Halloween spectacular. I promise I'm not going to do the whole show like that. But it is Halloween, and I'm happy. It's Halloween for you guys. It's not Halloween for us, but we're celebrating Halloween early.
Brett's been celebrating Halloween for about the last 8 months, so this is just the culmination of all his dreams.
It's true. It's true. I'm here. I have my wine tonight. It's Fangria wine from Vampire Wines from California, if you're interested in American wines. Also, tonight is the annual Halloween party in Salem, Massachusetts, and they're one of the hosts. So not a sponsor of our show, but they're sponsoring that, so support them if you get a chance.
Wow, actually this is a big deal because I know you love the Halloween party in Salem. So to be here with us tonight, drinking your Fangria, dressed as Dracula, is probably second place to being in Salem.
It is a sacrifice. But for you, Alice, anything. And we have an awesome show tonight. Alice is terrified, as well she should be, because tonight we are going to talk about one of the most famous cryptids. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a mysterious creature of unknown origin. In really all of history, I think this is the most famous cryptid. It's my favorite, and one of the coolest American legends. I mean, this is a homegrown American legend. I'm dressed as a vampire, which is not an American legend, but Mothman absolutely is. And for those of you who know the story of Mothman, you know just how creepy it is because it ties in to real life horror. Whether you buy the existence of Mothman or not, the story that we're going to tell you has some real tragedy. So buckle up, because this one is going to be quite a ride.
Brett, I am pre-freaked out. I really am. I'm not kidding about this. So far this Halloween, I've been able to kind of deal with the terrible and frightening murders that have happened, but this is of a whole otherworldly kind.
Yeah, so we've kept it pretty straight this Halloween. We haven't done a lot of paranormal stuff. It's been your standard sort of true crime, as we talk about a lot. Most of our October episodes are, but this one is definitely in the realm of paranormal. So it's an appropriate one for tonight, for Halloween, when you're listening. And we're going to watch this week, even though Halloween will be over, it'll be November, but that's fine. This Friday, we're going to watch The Mothman Prophecies, which is based on a book of the same name about the Mothman phenomenon. It's a great movie, really interesting book. If you don't know anything about the UFO scare of the late 60s, early 70s, the flap, as they called it, you learn a lot from that book, and of course ties in to the Mothman encounters that were happening in West Virginia. So Alice, I think we've given it enough preface. I think it's time to get down to brass tacks. What do you think? You ready?
I will never be ready, and that's why we know we got to get through this. We just got to get through this on this day of Halloween. You guys are about to be freaked out.
I think this is awesome. I don't think I'm going to dress up like this every episode from now on. So y'all just wait. Okay, here we go. So Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It is well named. It's a pleasant, bucolic town on the Ohio River. The kind of place that nothing bad ever happens. But something bad did happen there, and dozens of people lost their lives as a result. But did a freak accident take their lives, or was it something more? Was it something that we could have seen coming if we had paid attention to the signs, the portents, in the form of a giant bird-like creature with great wings and red eyes and a body in the shape of a man, something that came to be called the Mothman. And if you're wondering where that name comes from, at the time, Batman was obviously a big comic, and one of Batman's enemies, opponents that he would face was the Mothman. And so most people think it comes from that. The descriptions of the creature, I mean, giant moth doesn't really sound that scary to me. I guess a giant man-sized moth would be pretty terrifying. But the creature is described really as more of a man-like creature with these giant wings. So I've never thought that Mothman was really the best description for it, but I can see where the name comes in.
Well, as we always do, even with legends like this, there is a timeline, and it matters. So let's talk about where Mothman came from, if we even know. And let's not just go back a few years or even a few decades. Let's go back a few centuries. On October 10th, 1774, Chief Cornstalk leads a native fight against Virginia militia who are seeking to expand territorial borders into Shawnee land in the area now known as West Virginia. His forces were defeated, and Cornstalk retreated across the Ohio River, and he signed a peace treaty. But 3 years later, with the American Revolution in full swing, Chief Cornstalk comes to Fort Randolph to discuss American intentions. but the Shawnee had largely sided with the British, and the commander of the fort was suspicious. So, Chief Cornstalk was arrested, and soon thereafter, when Shawnee warriors attacked and killed an American soldier, the retribution was swift. Cornstalk and his son were executed by a mob. According to legend, before Cornstalk died, he cursed the land. And soon thereafter, a new town was born near the spot where the fort once stood. Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
And I always thought that the Cornstalk thing was fake. That didn't actually happen. But it turns out Cornstalk was a real person. The entire story is true. Whether or not he cursed the town, that is probably an embellishment. If you've ever read the curse goes on for like 3 pages. So it's like the longest curse ever. It's not just like, I curse you as like they let him just get the whole curse out. It was like they said, before we execute you, give us your whole curse, because it goes on and on and on. But so that's probably not true, but it's certainly the case that, you know, this town was founded in a very sort of bloody way, not unlike a lot of places. And sometimes people will say, and in fact, in the Mothman Prophecies, it says, West Virginia is this sort of weird place, and there were no Native Americans there because they avoided the land because they knew it was cursed. And that's actually not true. I don't know where that comes from. If you go to the West Virginia State website, it'll tell you basically the same thing. But historians are like, no, that's not true at all. There were all sorts of Native Americans there at the time, and including Chief Cornstalk. You know, it's kind of funny because they have this one story about Chief Cornstalk, and then on the other hand, they're telling you there were no natives, because it makes it seem, you know, spookier, right? It's like the land, even the natives cursed or whatever. But in any event, this is how this town gets its start. And people always point back to this as one of the reasons for the horrible tragedy that we're going to talk about, is that this is somehow a continuation of that. But let's fast forward all the way to November 1st, 1966. Like all stories and like all legends, there are things that we're going to talk about that are really, they haven't exactly been nailed down. Some of it may have happened, some of it might not have. We'll tell you the things that we absolutely know happened. This is not one of them. This is one that it could have happened, or it could have been sort of, when people looked back at this story and were looking for more support, they kind of made this up or embellished it. But it's often said that this is the first sighting of the Mothman, so we're going to go with it. It's November 1st, 1966. A National Guardsman stationed at the Armory just north of Point Pleasant is looking out into the nature preserve across from the base when he sees what he will later describe as a man in a brown suit perched on a tree beyond the high fence. If he actually saw that, you can imagine why this would stick out. You don't tend to see too many men in brown suits standing on a tree branch in the middle of a nature preserve. But that's what he thinks he sees. So he goes to get another guardsman because he wants to confirm this, because this obviously is very strange, and he thinks maybe his eyes are just playing tricks on him. But by the time they return, whatever it was gone. Now, other than the man in the brown suit, it is not going to match the Mothman descriptions. Man-sized creature standing on a branch. Okay, maybe it's Mothman, but we don't see any wings, for instance. We don't see flying, which we're going to see later. So even if he did see this, it's possible that this is unrelated to the story that we're going to get into. So fast forward 11 days, November 12th, 1966. And I love this part of the story because it is so perfect in where it takes place. Now, unlike the National Guardsman, we actually know a name here, which lends some credence to this possibly being a real example. One thing you'll see when you see legends and you're trying to figure out, did this really happen or did it not? Unnamed sources and unnamed locations are a pretty good sign that your leg's being pulled. But here, we actually have the name of a man, though what happens is just so perfectly creepy that you wonder whether or not it's true. But Kenneth Duncan and 4 other grave diggers, yes, you heard that right, grave diggers, are working in a cemetery in a town just southeast of Point Pleasant in the middle of the night, because of course they are. What better time to be digging a grave than in the middle of the night? I guess you got to get the grave ready for whatever funeral's coming. They're in the cemetery. It's the middle of the night. It's just southeast of Point Pleasant. And for a minute, they watched in horror as a beast, something that appeared to be a human with wings, flew out of a group of trees and over their heads before finally disappearing into the forest beyond. And obviously when they saw this, probably didn't help that they were in a cemetery in the middle of the night, totally freaked them out. And they could not comprehend exactly what they had seen because it was beyond anything that they normally saw out there in the forest. And this is important because we're going to come back to this a lot. Every time there's a sighting, you're going to see people who suggest, well, maybe it's just this animal or that animal. But remember, these folks aren't, down from the city for the weekend. They live in this area. They're familiar with the wildlife. They're out in nature a lot. These guys, their job is to dig graves. So they are out in nature at night in this kind of area a lot. And this is unlike anything they had ever seen before.
But that won't be the last time this strange figure is seen, because just 2 days later, on November 14th, Newell Partridge is watching? The Transylvania accent's catching. He's watching,
Watching.
Watching. We're never going to get through this. Newell Partridge is watching television when he sees two glowing red objects outside. He has no idea what it is, so he's incredibly brave because he leaves his home to check it out. And all of a sudden, in horror, he realizes it's the eyes of a tall figure standing in a tree. It flew away, and his dog, a German Shepherd, Bandit, took off in pursuit. Partridge grabbed his shotgun to pursue, but he was suddenly gripped with an overwhelming fear unlike anything he'd ever experienced, and he was completely paralyzed. No matter how much he wanted to follow Bandit, he simply could not. He was rooted to the ground. And unfortunately, Bandit was never seen again.
And this is a pretty common thing for people who see this entity, is just an overwhelming fear unlike anything they've ever experienced, something that's so powerful that they can't even function. Even people, once again, it was nothing for this guy to go off into the woods with his gun in pursuit of some animal, particularly when his dog's involved. But for him, in that moment, he simply could not do it.
Absolutely. And we're going to see this very similar situation play out just the next day. On November 15th, two couples, Dickie and Linda Maxwell and Steve and Mary Millette, again, we know names, so this is kind of becoming more and more specific, are riding together in the TNT area of Mount Pleasant, which refers to the area in and around the old World War II munitions plant. And they're standing on the side of the road. They were struck because it was a dark figure, but it didn't look like a human because it was 7 feet tall. It had white wings and red eyes. It was standing over the carcass of a dog, specifically a German Shepherd. And as they passed this figure, it rose into the air and began to fly. But it didn't fly away like you would normally see vultures or birds on the side of the road when a car passes by. Quite the opposite. As they were driving past this figure, it suddenly started flying towards the car. It came after the car. And they, understandably, were very confused and scared by this, so they began to try to outrun this figure. They started pushing on the gas, going as fast as 100 miles per hour, but no matter what they did, no matter how hard they pushed on the pedal, they could not escape this creature, which let out a horrible screech. And they thought this was the end. But it was only as they entered town that it turned around and suddenly flew away. It caused such a ruckus that Mary Heyer, a local reporter, ends up writing a story about this experience by these two couples, and she sends it out on the wire. At this point, the story caught fire. John Keel, a well-known paranormal investigator, came to the area to study the phenomena. If Brett were alive during this time, I know he would have been there investigating as well. And John Keel ends up writing a book that would make the case famous, The Mothman Prophecies. Meanwhile, Mary began having recurring nightmares, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she was terrified whenever she woke up, and all she could remember were Christmas presents in the water.
And yeah, I mean, if John Keel basically had the perfect job as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he essentially traveled around the country studying paranormal phenomena. He did it before it was cool. If he was around now, he'd have like 3 shows on Discovery. But he wrote a lot of books, he wrote a lot of articles, and he was interesting because he was very skeptical of a lot of the UFO stuff that was going on. He wasn't very popular with a lot of the UFO people because he didn't just buy whatever they said. And that's one reason I think he's a little bit more credible maybe than some other people, including some of the people who are constantly hoaxing him. So if you read Mothman Prophecies, there are things that happen in it which we now know are hoaxes by other UFO investigators who were just trying to mess with him. So it's interesting reading it with that knowledge because you see some of the stuff, but a lot of it obviously was not. And the Mothman thing started before, he gets there. And you've got, what's interesting about this, like Alice said, we have 4 named witnesses who are telling this story, and that's on November 15th when it happens. And November 16th, oh wait, that's your part. Sorry. I'm trying to steal your stuff.
It's okay. You know,
sorry.
You steal lives and blood. It's just part of the shtick, And that's the thing with these 4 individuals. Not only did they see what this horrifying sight, they lived this flight, and at the last moment, this creature leaves them as they're entering town. And they don't stay quiet about it because the next day on November 16th, there's a press conference and they give their story to the media. Dr. Robert Smith, a wildlife expert, claimed at the conference, "Don't worry, guys, you're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a large crane, nothing more." His explanation did not stop the story from spreading like wildfire. Dozens of encounters would follow, either because they were legitimate, or maybe they were the result of hysteria, or because they were just fabricated because people were trying to get attention, get news media attention, burn the fire of this seemingly amazing legend. But as for the initial witnesses, the sheriff said that they were so shaken and upset, and he had known these 4 individuals his entire life. As for the sheriff, he believed them.
And look, I think that's an important thing to note. This is a small town. Everybody knows each other. And the people who are likely to make up something like this. And it seems like the sheriff didn't think that they were. And a lot of them are still alive. They talk about this to this day. And Kill certainly didn't think that they were making this up. And the crane thing's interesting. If they had seen this creature across the field like the National Guardsmen did, or even like the gravediggers for a couple seconds, okay, you can sort of see how maybe they would make that mistake, even though they were used to cranes and saw cranes all the time. But I don't know of any cranes that fly 100 miles an hour. So if that part of their story is true, that this creature was able to follow them and keep up with them, even if it's a mutant crane, I don't think it's going to be capable of doing that. But the crane theory, as we're going to talk about when we get to theories, is one of the most popular explanations for what people were seeing here. So as Alice mentioned, there's going to be a whole lot of sightings, and it's really hard to nail down which ones are legitimate and which ones aren't, because after this press conference, the town goes crazy, and they're seeing Mothman everywhere. It's like just recently some people apparently saw Bigfoot, and they have new Bigfoot footage. For you Bigfoot fans out there, it looked more like Chewie to me. Chewbacca was out in the Colorado wilderness. But anyway, you have that sort of thing. Everybody's seen it. And I'm sure everybody's going to see Bigfoot in Colorado now because we have that new video. But there's another sighting which is interesting because it happened that night, but before the story had spread. Raymond Wamsley and Marcella Bennett were visiting some of their friends, the Thomas family. And when Marcella exited her car at the Thomas house, she saw a figure ahead of her that was slowly rising to its feet. She described it as being gray and bigger than a man, but the most distinctive feature of all was its glowing eyes. She was so shocked by what she was seeing that she actually dropped her baby daughter on the ground. That's how shocked she was at this creature that she was seeing. She immediately fell down on top of her daughter trying to protect her from whatever it was that she was seeing, and she was incapable of moving. She was frozen in fear. But something enabled her to break free, and she would later say her overwhelming fear was overcome by her desire to protect her baby. She picked up her baby, and she and the rest of the group ran towards their friend's house, got inside, and locked themselves inside. Walmsley would call the police as they described this creature sort of circling the house, peering through the windows. By the time the police arrived, whatever it was gone. To this day, Marcella reports that she is still traumatized by the experience, and it is still something where she will wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares.
I mean, here, especially because this is before all the hysteria hits, before it becomes this like national, news story, it rings so true to the previous example we had of Newell Partridge. He was also at home, right? They're not in some public area, but at home, they see the glowing red eyes, and they are completely stricken with just this paralyzation by fear. I mean, there's no indication that I saw that Partridge knew Marcella or Walmsley or the Thomas family, but they're telling kind of essentially the same type of story, but separated by time and space.
Now, the next sighting is one that is a little bit less believable just because it happened after this, and it's a sighting by people who were looking for the creature. So on November 28th, Faye Laporte and her brother, they drove out to the TNT area to see if they could find the Mothman. Faye would later describe that she looked out the window and could see the glowing red eyes that they had heard so much about. At that point, they decided to get out of there, but no matter how fast they would drive, they could not lose the creature. At one point, her brother slammed on the brakes, hoping that the creature would just keep flying, but it didn't. Instead, it jumped on the hood of the car. Then it leapt up and landed on top of the car before flying off to a building nearby. At this point, Faye's brother actually gets out of the car and starts throwing rocks at the creature until it flew away, which, frankly, of all the things that you hear about this case, that might be the least believable, that he manages to get out of the car and throw rocks at this creature. So, people, they don't understand why this is happening. They don't understand why they're seeing this creature. And these sightings start in November of 1966, and they continue really for the next year or so. People are seeing the Mothman. They are seeing UFOs in the sky. They start to report seeing lights in the sky. John Keel is actually there, not so much for the Mothman, but for all the other UFO activity. He believes the Mothman is somehow sort of a part of this UFO activity, that somehow he's a creature that reflects what's going on. And it's not the only creature around. At the same time, there is this other entity called Indrid Cold, which is often associated with the Mothman, but appears to be really, I think the only reason it's associated with the Mothman is because Mothman Prophecies includes it. John Keel includes it in his book, but it's a very sort of separate thing. But basically, there's a guy driving down the road not too far away from Point Pleasant, and he says that a UFO lands in front of his car, and a guy gets out, knocks on his door. It's just, dude looks basically like a person, except he's a little bit taller, a little bit thinner, and he has this smile on his face, this like ear-to-ear toothy smile, a smile so big that it was creepy. And the guy introduces himself as Indrid Cold and says, like, he's an alien from Lamulos. And this, like, thing just goes on its own. And all this is happening at the same time that the Mothman's flying around Point Pleasant and UFOs are being seen all over the place. And so people start to wonder, what exactly does all this mean? And the way Keel described it in Point Pleasant, there was this air of fear of uneasiness and anxiety, and this just notion that something bad was going to happen, that somehow all of this stuff was culminating in something bad, and nobody could really put their fingers on what it was or what they were feeling, but there was that sense of impending doom, and it would turn out that the people who felt that way were right.
Well, like Brett was saying, this continues. It's not just a one-off thing. And you know, when something hits the media, becomes hysteria, it usually flames out after some time. And that's not what we see here. For the next year, people continue to report all of these strange experiences, strange sightings, and they're all pretty consistent with each other. And this all culminates on December 15th, 1967, about 13 months after the first sighting of this man creature with wings. Built in 1928, the Silver Bridge connected Point Pleasant with Ohio. The bridge was always busy, and on this night at 5:05 p.m., it was no different. In fact, lots of people were out. It was just a few days before Christmas, and shoppers were returning home with cars filled with Christmas presents. Their cars packed the bridge, and they were all stuck at a standstill like most days around rush hour. Suddenly, people heard the unmistakable sound of rending metal, soon followed by a boom. And as if in a horror movie, these people were sitting in their cars, unable to move because the cars were all standing still. And off in the distance, they see, section by section, the bridge began to collapse into the icy waters below them. The water was freezing and the current was swift, and there was nothing to be done for the 36 cars that stood at a standstill on the bridge, just waiting for their section to break and plunge them into the icy water below them. And as the bridge collapsed, that's exactly what happened. 36 cars and trucks fell into the water below. 46 people fell with them, and they would never leave the water alive. It was a terrible tragedy, the worst bridge collapse in U.S. history. And engineers studied the disaster, trying to determine what happened. And they determined it was a single link in the chain holding up the bridge. One single link had a 0.1-inch defect, which over the decades had weakened and broken, causing the collapse and proving the old cliche terribly true. The weakest link. The bridge collapse occurred 13 months after the first sighting of the Mothman, and the joint that failed was C-13. After the collapse of the bridge, there were no more sightings of the Mothman in Point Pleasant.
And so obviously, it's not hard to figure out what people thought. Once this happened, then it all sort of started to make sense. That this was some sort of harbinger of doom. This horrible thing that affected this entire town. Remember, this is a small town. Everyone knew somebody who died. A lot of people, someone in their family died. John Keel starts his book with, he's stuck, it's pouring down rain, he's stuck in the mud, he's dressed in black, so he looks like a man in black. He wanders up to this house and knocks on the door and asks if he can use the phone. And the people are so freaked out by him that they basically say no and slam the door in his face. And later on, he would hear stories about this strange man in black who had visited this family, and it was actually him. But he notes that those two people died when the bridge collapsed, the two people that he had met. So this was a terrible tragedy, and one that has become inextricably linked with these sightings. And people would say afterwards that, and it's important to note afterwards, that they saw a creature resembling the Mothman around the bridge in the days leading up to the collapse. Those sightings are impossible to prove, obviously, but it has become part of this enduring legend and this question about whether or not the Mothman, number one, is real, and number two, is some sort of harbinger of doom. And what's interesting is there are many examples of similar creatures in myths and folklore around the world, and throughout history, various cultures have described an enormous bird, man-like creature which was the portent of bad things to come. In Native American tradition, it was called the Thunderbird. In India, it was called the Garuda. In John Keel's book, he calls this the American Garuda often. In the Mediterranean, Greek, Persian tradition, it was the Roc. And in all of these, you do have this massive bird-like creature that people see. When they see it, they know something terrible is going to happen. And you wonder, are these just random legends? Is this just the kind of thing people like to make up? Or somehow are they connected? And is the Mothman actually an iteration of a much older phenomenon? One thing that you'd like to have in a case like this is some actual proof. We have sightings, we have testimony from witnesses, but as we've talked about in every case we've ever discussed, it's always funny. People say it's, this is a circumstantial case, and in fact, circumstantial cases are much stronger because you're not relying on the flawed observational skills of human beings. Well, in this case, that's mostly what you have, is people seeing things. But there were a few things that are interesting, and one of them is the eyes of I'll call them the victims, but the people who saw this creature. A number of them experienced severe conjunctivitis in the days that followed. Now, pink eye, as most of you know it, is often caused by bacteria, but not always. And in fact, there is a type of conjunctivitis which is caused by extreme exposure to UV lights. Welders will often run into this problem, as are people who live at high altitudes. They can experience this very specific kind of conjunctivitis, and the symptoms of that are consistent with what the victims experienced. And that made John Keel wonder if the bright red lights of the eyes was more than just the reflection of light in the eyes, if in fact they were putting off some sort of UV light that when these people saw the creature and saw it for a long period of time, it would actually cause this. It would cause them to have this type of conjunctivitis, which is not bacterial in nature, but is because of the exposure to this kind of bright light.
Whew. So, speaking about these eyes, what we hear over and over in these sightings is something about the eyes of this creature. This really stands out more than anything else about these sightings. They're described as large and red to the point of glowing with intensity. Now, some have suggested that eye shine is a possible example of this. What that is, you've probably all encountered it in your own pictures that you've taken, is a phenomena that occurs when you shine a light in certain nocturnal creatures' eyes. So think about when you walk outside and you see an owl or some other nocturnal creature, and if a light shines by, you see glowing red from their eyes. But the people who saw this creature themselves, they said they were familiar with eye shine. People brought this up and said, could it have been eye shine? They said this was not it. It wasn't just some eye shine. It was something glowing with such intensity. And if it was glowing with intensity and giving off its own light, it might be kind of part of that reason that Brett was just talking about, some intense UV light that caused this conjunctivitis in all these people who may not have been related to each other or known each other, but suffered the same conjunctivitis symptoms after seeing this creature.
So I think it's time to talk about some theories in this case about what this creature could be. And we have to start with what is probably the greatest theory of them all, and that is the owl theory. Yes, that's right. The owl theory makes an appearance in this case.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities, so do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
Barred owls, which we've learned about before. Barred owls, man, they are just all over true crime. You just didn't even know it. Barred owls have large eyes that grow red when lights shine in them. Alice was talking about this eye shine thing earlier. Now look, they are not big enough to fit this description. If you ever see a 7-foot barred owl, run for cover, because we already know their violent tendencies, and you certainly don't want to deal with one that's that big. They don't grow that big. But it's possible that, people moving at great speed in a car already freaked out. Maybe they've been doing a little drinking or something. You never know what might have been going on down at the TNT area. Maybe they see these owls. Maybe it's a much larger owl than is typical. It's sort of an unusually large owl. They see it and they freak out. And as we've said before, memory is unreliable. And if a barred owl could frame Michael Peterson, maybe it could create the Mothman hysteria as well.
I love a good owl theory more than anybody else. But had I not just had a barred owl at my house a couple of days ago because we invited the barred owl to our house, I didn't know I was inviting a potential, portent of horror and tragedy into my home. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, we had the zoo bring some animals for my son's birthday. And of course, I picked the barred owl to come. And Brett saw it with his own eyes too. And it was about the size of my forearm. So we're not talking about just a shade off of the 7-foot figure that people saw, but something much, much smaller. So while I love good owl theories, I think it would be really difficult even with the most unreliable narrators or unreliable, firsthand sighters to mistake something of like 1.5 to 2 feet for something greater than life. So
yeah, unfortunately, I think that's probably true. I think the barred owl theory, sadly, probably has to go away.
But something similar to the owl theory, maybe it's not an owl. Maybe the owl's too small to really fit into this theory. What if it were a crane? Sandhill cranes are big, huge. They can grow actually to 5 feet tall. Those of you who I met, recently at CrimeCon or another convention, I'm about 5 feet tall. So it's about as tall as me, a person size, and they have red markings on their heads. So maybe it was a really, really big mutant bird. The problem, of course, is that the people in this area were very familiar with cranes because they lived in this area. They saw them often. They knew how they moved. And none of the witnesses thought it was remotely possible that a crane was responsible for what they saw. It didn't move like a crane. It didn't attack like a crane. Cranes don't attack, in my experience. And the red markings didn't account for the intensely burning red eyes that they saw.
I feel like the crane theory is like the avalanche theory in Dyatlov Pass. So the only people who believe the avalanche theory are people who've never hiked anywhere, experienced an avalanche, you've never been to Dyatlov Pass. All the people who've been to Dyatlov Pass and all the people who have experience actually hiking and camping in those conditions will tell you there's no way it was an avalanche. And I feel like it's a similar thing here. Everybody in town, and including all the people who saw this, are like, look, we know what a crane looks like. It wasn't a crane. And really the only people who think it's a crane are basically, like all those yokels. They don't even know the difference between a crane and a giant mutant Mothman, whatever. And I get that the crane theory is popular because they are so big. And if you don't know, that's the thing. Like it's like a moose. If you've never seen a moose, if you just saw a moose in the wild for the first time and you didn't know what moose were and you had no notion of mooses, you would run screaming into the nearest town and say, there is some sort of ancient prehistoric beast out there in the woods and y'all need to go kill it. And then they'd be like, oh, you're talking about the moose? Because moose are huge. They are so much bigger than you can even imagine. And they're really dangerous. And I feel like that's the thing with these cranes. Everybody around has seen the crane. They know what the cranes look like. They're not going to mistake a crane for a quote-unquote Mothman. That's the kind of thing only, the reporter from New York City would come down to West Virginia and say maybe it was a crane. So I just, it's hard for me to believe it's a crane when everybody who lives in the area is like, there's no way it was a crane. So that's my thoughts on the crane thing. Okay.
Although a crane theory, it was about time we had another, bird theory.
Another bird.
So, got another bird. It's not just the owls. You can't say that we just hate owls.
That's right. We're going to have to start having crane memes in the gallery. One popular theory is that this is mass hysteria, and this particularly for most of the sightings after the initial sighting. And, the thing is, the initial sighting is the one you really have to deal with, but if it's a hoax or if those people are just making a mistake, then everything else can be summed up by mass hysteria. It's possible that all this is just in people's heads. Once the Mothman became publicized, the number of sightings skyrocketed. Most of the 100 supposed sightings came after the press got a hold of the story. So maybe this all is just mass hysteria. It's driven by people who saw what they wanted to see. And in some ways, this is probably the most likely theory, especially for those 100 post-initial sightings. And the theory goes that the reason no one saw the Mothman after the Silver Bridge tragedy was actually a pretty simple one. The horror of real life had successfully purged the populace of any taste for fantasy. They no longer had time to scare themselves with Mothman. Real horror had come to Point Pleasant. And yet, the problem with this is before the story was publicized, you did have multiple people who say they saw something that they described consistently as a large bird-like creature the size of a man with red eyes that was able to traverse great distances at great speed. And there's no indication that any of these people were in contact with each other. So where did that initial story come from? And how could it be mass hysteria when the people involved weren't sharing a common delusion? Even if mass hysteria will deal with most of the sightings, it's hard to account for the first few.
It really is. And so none of this sits right yet, because maybe we can account for subsequent sightings as mass hysteria, but those first few, especially with how consistent the experiences were, still get to me, Brett. And so you said something about that moose, that if you'd never even heard of a moose, never seen a moose and saw it in the wild, you can imagine it would just shock you out of your boots. So what if this is a cryptid? Maybe the Mothman is just an unknown species. The Mothman's often described as a cryptid because of its animal-like nature, but it doesn't seem like it is one. You see, the Mothman was only seen for a short amount of time around a disaster. And if it were just an animal, you would think that once you saw, say, a moose, people would start seeing the moose everywhere. They're like, you know what? These moose do live among us. They're here, and they're here. They come out at night. They graze, in these pastures, and you continue to see them. What's strange, if this is some unknown species, is once it's seen, why does it all of a sudden disappear? Why is it around for about a year? And then this tragedy happens, and then this massive creature, most creatures that exist in nature, there's more than one, because you need to procreate, and you need to have more than one of you, right? Other than
moth children.
Moth children to carry on your moth legacy. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. There seems to be one, disappears. A pretty big thing to disappear right after this bridge collapse. And also the biology doesn't seem to work. So even if there are creatures out there that we've never seen before, the first time you see a moose, the first time you see a zebra, you can think, oh my goodness, this is so wild. I've never seen something like this before. But at least something about the physics of those animals works, right? The moose has some of the skinniest, longest legs to allow it to run. The zebra is black and white for camouflage. I'm not actually sure why it's the colors that it is, but there's nothing about it that you think, physically, that is impossible. But here you have that. You have a man-like looking figure who's huge. But we know that people can't fly, even if you have mechanical wings, because we weigh too much. And our bodies just aren't designed for flight. So if this man-like figure has the figure of a body with these large wings, how do the physics work that it could fly? Not just fly a little bit, fly up to 100 miles per hour and attack while they're doing it.
For a second there, Alice, we thought that the man standing behind you had gotten you.
Stop it. Don't even do that. Don't do that. You're not funny. I'm already doing this episode for you, Brett. You are not going to super freak me out. And your face is already freaking me out. Okay. The Mothman is described as a man with wings, and the chance it could fly at those high speeds and jump from the roof of a car to the roof of a building just seems unlikely. So even species out there that haven't been discovered by man, you would still think that they follow the laws of physics.
And most cryptids do. I mean, most cryptids are things like the Loch Ness Monster. The Loch Ness Monster is just a plesiosaur that somehow survived and lives in the loch. Bigfoot is just a regular animal that lives in the massive forest of the West, right? But here, this is a creature that seems to pop into existence and then disappear and does all these things that don't seem natural. John Keel, for instance, did not think it was a cryptid for that very reason. That's why he thought it had something to do with UFOs, because he just thought the fact that it could do these things indicated there's no way this is a natural creature. And that brings us to aliens. Could the Mothman be an alien? As we said, the sightings in Point Pleasant coincide with many traditional claims of extraterrestrials and lights in the sky. And in fact, those who saw the Mothman or lights also reported other events, including things like lost time and visits by the men in black. And that has led some people to think that Mothman is some sort of alien phenomenon, possibly attempting to warn the people of Point Pleasant of this horrible tragedy that was coming, though if that's what it was doing, it did a very poor job of it. Like most alien theories, of course, it's impossible to prove that. We don't really have any evidence of it, other than the fact that the Mothman did seem to coincide with what you would call traditional UFO activity.
All I know is a lot of weird things were happening in Point Pleasant. And if not aliens, what if it were something like aliens, but interdimensional travelers? Called ultra-terrestrials also by John Keel, this theory is that UFOs and other unusual events are not caused actually by aliens from distant galaxies. No. Rather, these creatures exist on this world, albeit in a different dimension, kind of like Stranger Things. So for reasons we don't know, they're able to travel between dimensions, and they often interact with ours, but it's one-sided. They can come and go between dimensions, but we are here. And when we see something from another dimension, it is literally otherworldly for us, but what if it were very much this worldly, just not the world that we see?
And Keel, this was a very popular theory for him. It was one reason he wasn't popular amongst a lot of UFO theorists, because he said, look, these are not little green men traveling across the vast distances of space to mutilate a cow. These are somehow creatures that exist in some sort of very close dimension to us. This fits with multi-world theory, the multiverse, all that stuff. And that's why a lot of the sightings, like take Indrid Cold. Indrid Cold basically looked like a person, just a little different. And this theory was essentially these things are very close to us, but different enough that when we see them, they freak us out. And these interdimensional travelers are here for reasons that aren't clear. It's unclear what they're doing or what effect they're trying to have. But it was a good way for him to explain things like Mothman, because Mothman maybe is a cryptid in this other dimension, and for some reason he was in our dimension for a little while and then went away. I mean, look, once again, these are the ultimate sort of theoretical things. We don't even know if there are other dimensions. There's some pretty strong arguments in physics that there are, but I mean, who knows? Once you get to that stuff, it's like magic, right? But that is what John Keel thought, and it is a theory that a lot of people take seriously. I don't know that I take it seriously, but
I just have no idea. I mean, I guess you could draw like enough math proofs and physics proofs to show it, but like why it could be one-sided, but like we wouldn't fall into a hole and go to another dimension. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, and Keel points out things like he would get warnings that some sort of disaster was coming to Point Pleasant, but what he was told is that the power plant across the river was going to blow up, basically. That's what he thought was going to happen. Or he thought the secret military base, which we now know about, but at the time was still sort of secret, there was going to be some sort of disaster there. And he talks about this a lot, where he would get these messages from these beings that he thought, and they would tell him about events that were going to happen. And then something very similar would happen, but just off enough that it actually didn't help him to know. Because it would be like the Pope's going to be attacked at an airport in Turkey. And then the Pope was attacked on the drive from the airport, but not in Turkey. And so it was stuff like that. And his theory was that the whole interdimensionality thing is the problem. That in these beings' timeline, that's what's happening. And so they're actually warning us about things that have happened in their timeline, but because our timeline is different, it's just different enough that their warnings aren't useful. I don't know. It's an interesting theory. It's the kind of stuff that I'm fascinated by, but I don't really know how helpful it is to us in figuring out what was going on. Which brings us to probably the most popular theory, is that whatever the Mothman is, and we can't be sure exactly what he is a harbinger of doom. The reason for him being in Point Pleasant when he was because something terrible was going to happen. The Silver Bridge is the most famous example, although there are other supposed appearances of the Mothman that fit as well. Now look, whether the Mothman is a harbinger of doom or the cause of these things that happen, who knows? And maybe you think it's all a coincidence. And yet, in a small city in Ukraine in the early months of 1986, people began to see what they described as a large black bird flying around the power plant where most of the residents worked. They described it as standing 7 feet tall, having enormous wings and glowing red eyes. They named it after the city where it was found, the Black Bird of Chernobyl. The sightings culminated just before April 26, 1986, when at 1:23 a.m., during a poorly planned safety test, which is the ultimate irony, Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant went critical, causing an explosion and the worst nuclear disaster in human history. Now look, is the Blackbird of Chernobyl real? It is hard to say, because unlike in the Mothman case, where we have surviving people who saw the creature, every single person who claimed to see the Blackbird of Chernobyl died either of radiation poisoning or as a result of the explosion in the wake of the disaster. But the reports in Chernobyl are not the only reports of a creature like the Mothman in an area where something happened. The question for us is, are these reports credible? Or are they sort of post hoc justifications, or in fact, urban legends altogether?
And here is why this story, today's episode, freaks me out so much. It's not that it only happens in Point Pleasant. The fact that this is something that we see all over the world across kind of centuries is what really hits at my core of, you know, the freak out barometer is really high here. So I'm going to take us back to January 1926. Residents near Shao'anten Dam in southeastern China report seeing, quote, a man dragon in the skies. On January 19th, the dam collapsed, killing 15,000 people. This is horrific. Absolutely horrific. But did it happen? See, here's the thing. I can't find any evidence of Shao'anten Dam existing in China at all, or that this dam ever collapsed. And I'll tell you one other thing. When I read the name of the dam, I was like, this must be a typo because that's not a word in Chinese.
I wanted to
Like,
ask you that.
It sounds like a word, but it's not. So obviously, until there was like pinging that was standardized in the last few decades, people would just phonetically write out Chinese words to English words, but there was less uniformity to how you translated it because there's no American letters that correspond phonetically with Chinese pictographs at all. But what you have here phonetically written is Xiaoang. What it should be probably is either Xiao, which means small, or Xiaoen. Two different words, but this is kind of one word. So who knows? Because especially if this is from 1926, people like wrote out phonetically whatever they wanted. And I'm sure it was like, English speakers who had no idea how to properly translate. But I will say that that's not a word in today's version of sounding out phonetically the Chinese words. So the fact that my very first thought looking at that was like, that's a typo. But that is the name of the dam as has been reported since, existing. And the other thing is China's pretty big. We don't know everything about China. This is true. They do have a lot of dams. They have had catastrophic failures of dams before. But if you're talking about a dam that fails and kills an entire town, and there's no record of it, no one who has made it into lore. Like everything in Chinese culture it's an oral culture. You tell stories. That's how you pass down history. I have oral histories of everything in my family going back literally centuries. It would be strange that something so catastrophic isn't really memorialized anywhere and no one can point to where it existed and whether it actually happened.
No, I think this is a urban legend because I think 15,000 people being killed, there would be some evidence of it, but there's really not. And the only place you see references to this are when people are talking about Mothman. You don't see independent stories about this disaster. Like you can read about the Silver Bridge collapsing without reading about Mothman. There's a whole congressional report on it. There is nothing to back up the existence of this dam.
And okay, fine. So maybe that one didn't exist, but let's go to Freiburg, Germany. The Freiburg Shrieker. Have you ever heard of them? Because on September 10th, 1978, not too long after the Point Pleasant disaster, miners were about to enter a mine in Freiburg, Germany, when all of a sudden they reported seeing a dark figure with outstretched arms who stood in front of the entrance to the mine and in this horrific sound began to shriek with what I can only imagine sounds like my toddler at bedtime. Just kidding. They reported as a voice of 50 men, so intense that they couldn't be in its presence. And in just utter horror, the men fled and stayed as far away as they could, unsure of what to do. They were just hoping that this creature that they saw would eventually leave so that they could get inside the mine. At 8 a.m., instead of going into that mine, those men heard a massive explosion. And the creature was gone. And had those miners been inside the mine, they likely all would have died as well. And much like the Shaoanta Dam, no one, again, seems to be able to say what mine this was, who the miners were, what involved this accident. Was there a report of this accident? Because it was in the 70s. There were regulations in place. You usually have to report catastrophic failures and explosions like this one. There were no witnesses to the event. There were no witnesses who said that they knew the people who were at the mine. So this seems to kind of fall into the same category as the dam in China, which is to say, I think it might just be lore.
Yeah, I think this is another one where you see, it seems like this is a story that is lore, and it's unclear exactly where it came from, but the main place you'll see it is connected to Mothman. And I think, intentionally or not, there has been an effort to sort of bolster the Mothman story by surrounding it with other sightings of the Mothman. Even the Chernobyl story, all the witnesses are dead. So that makes it hard to confirm that the Blackbird of Chernobyl existed. And there's a lot of people who think this is much like a lot of these real event, unlike some of these, that's a real event, obviously, but that the existence of the black bird was something people talked about afterwards. Now, what's interesting about Point Pleasant, and we talked about this, they absolutely were seeing the Mothman before this happened. It is well documented. So there's no sort of retroactive thing going on there, but you do have to wonder about a lot of these stories.
Right. And we'll just pile on. We're talking all over the world. We've gone from China to Germany. If this is legend, it has spread far and wide. Because in 1985, in Mexico City, there are reports of a strange, massive bird in the area. On September 19th, an 8.0 earthquake strikes, killing at least 5,000 people. 8.0 is literally bringing buildings, tall buildings to the ground, demolishing them. That's the size of the earthquake. But for such a devastating earthquake, yet again, witnesses of the creature are hard to come by. Maybe it's because they all perished in this terrible earthquake. But seems a little bit strange yet again that we don't really have anyone who's able to name anyone who saw the creatures or can come forward to say that they saw the creature with their own eyes.
And that's not the last example of this. In 2011, American Marcus Pools reports seeing the Mothman in the Fukushima area of Japan. 3 days later, there was a massive earthquake. And I'm sure all of you know about the aftermath of that. So this seems solid, right? We have a name. We have somebody seeing something 3 days before this happened. Maybe this is another example. But it doesn't seem that Marcus Pools actually exists. It seems as though he probably was made up. And if he does exist, nobody can find him, and there's no reference to him or this event other than in Mothman literature. The only place you will see discussion of this sighting are on websites that investigate Mothman. There's no independent proof that any of this happened.
He doesn't have a Facebook profile.
Exactly. He doesn't have a Facebook profile. He's just, if he exists, he existed long enough to talk about the Mothman and then vanished. But recently there have been some pretty interesting Mothman sightings in Chicago. Sightings that match the general description of Mothman. These sightings are pretty widespread, and they are made by credible people, including pilots landing in the Chicago O'Hare Airport. There are people who've also claimed to see what they described as a man wearing a jetpack flying around Chicago. Some people think this is the Mothman. So, a little unclear exactly what's going on in Chicago. Obviously, other than, I guess, just Chicago's everyday travails, there have been no mass disasters in Chicago related to this, but might be something to keep your eye on. But whatever the truth may be, one place we know the Mothman lives on is in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And every year, Point Pleasant holds the Mothman Festival in September. We'll have to go to it sometime, Alice. And during that festival, this creature, who was once a harbinger of doom, becomes the town's most valuable commodity.
Isn't that strange, Brett? I really do find it strange that there's a festival, there's a statue, and
the statue's creepy.
The statue is incredibly creepy, and it's not, usually you'll see something like this maybe hundreds of years later, like in Salem, for example, where they celebrate, as you were saying, tonight is the Salem Halloween party. But this is actually pretty recent history. Like, people probably are still alive who remember this. It's possible. And it was a horrific event for the town. But, everyone, capitalism, man.
Yeah. And, I don't know that Point Pleasant's got a whole lot going on down there these days. I don't want to knock Point Pleasant. Never been there. I'm sure it's a very wonderful place to be. But I think the Mothman Festival undoubtedly draws in a lot of money. Sci-Fi did a Mothman movie. Back when Sci-Fi used to make the best bad movies. I used to love Sci-Fi. My parents and I, on Saturdays when it wasn't football season, when I was in college and I would come home, we would just sit and watch Sci-Fi all day, because they would have these they would pick a different monster every week, and they would lead up to the big sort of monster of the week new movie. But one week it would be giant crocodiles, and the next week it would be Yetis or whatever. And they did a Mothman movie that centered around the Mothman Festival and sort of Mothman returns and attacks the festival. It was great. But Yeah, Mothman, still around. One of the most, I think, just an awesome story. I mean, just one of the more interesting stories out there. Been a lot of stuff done on this. We talked about the Mothman Prophecies. We're going to watch the movie this week. I hope you guys will join us. I'm sure it's available somewhere. And we're going to link to a whole lot of different resources you can check out. The Y-Files, which is one of my favorite YouTube channels, did it. Bedtime Stories, which is another fantastic YouTube channel, has it. Astonishing Legends did like 5 2-hour-long episodes on Mothman. So if you just can't get enough, that's a great podcast that I enjoy quite a bit. And there's all sorts of stuff written about Mothman as well. So you can go all the way down the Mothman moth hole if you're interested in this story after Halloween wraps up. Well, Alice, should we do a question or something?
We have to, because I'm going to not be able to sleep tonight because I'm utterly freaked out by this. And of course, you need to be Brecula for the questions.
Oh, yes. Definitely. Definitely.
Oh, my goodness. You really are a man-child.
Okay. This is from Amy. Amy wants to know, what are a few of your favorite horror movies? Maybe top 5. And why does Alice not like horror movies? We'll start with you, Alice.
Okay, you guys know why. It means I'm probably the biggest fan of horror, right? The reason I don't like horror movies is because I find them so incredibly believable. That's why I don't like it. I cannot suspend reality. I am totally bought in. So in some senses, it's like you're going over the swing set. I'm such a big believer in it that I cannot watch it because I'm that scared.
I'll give you a quick top 5 horror movies. I would say the original Nightmare on Elm Street, the original Hellraiser, Session 9. Man, it is hard to do a top 5. It's hard to pick 5. I'm going to go with The Ring because it's so scary. I've only seen it one time. It's super scary. And another movie that's super scary that I think is underrated, I don't know if it's actually one of my top 5, but I'm going to say it anyways, is Sinister. If you haven't seen Sinister, you should absolutely watch it. It's got some of the best, one of the best jump scares in the history of movies happens in that movie. So that was great. So that's 5. The first 3 are definite. The last 2, you know, whatever. I could talk about movies forever. I will say this. If you're on the gallery, David has been doing like a horror movie a week. He's one of the moderators, or a horror movie a day. And his list has been fantastic. So if you're looking for horror movies, join the gallery and just watch the movies he's selecting. He's done a fantastic job. Even though he doesn't like Session 9, and usually I judge people pretty harshly if they don't like Session 9. But it's fine. I'll give him a pass because he's got everything else. Everything else is pretty good. Well, let's see. Do you want to do one more?
Absolutely.
One more movie?
We
more
know
question?
that
I always like answering the questions.
When you're dressed up, Brett, you might as well stay for the party.
That's a good point. I'm still drinking my Fangria, which is really, it's actually not bad, guys. Vampire wine, Fangria. Check it out. Okay. Here you go, Alice. This is from DCF. How do your spouses feel about the time you put into the podcast? Was there ever a time where they felt uncomfortable with the relationship between you two, as you seem very close?
Yeah. Do you guys see Brett? He's currently dressed as a vampire. I think we are okay. I think our spouses feel just fine. Mrs. Brett helped him turn into that, and he is my worst nightmare right now, so I think we're fine.
She opened my bottle of wine for me, too. I wouldn't.
There you go. You know what I really love about this, Brett? I think it is always great when you can see other people with, like, good, healthy friendships, whether it's, like, between women, between men and women. It's beautiful. We need to see all more examples of that because we could all use more friends. So I will turn that question around and say, I hope this is if you put your arm around your best friend, whoever your best friend is, vampire, werewolf, whatever, and know that you don't have to look the same, like the same things at all, and still be the greatest of friends.
There you go. Absolutely. That's right. Yes, that is the right answer. And our spouses are very involved in the podcast. Like I said, I wouldn't even be able to open my wine. I certainly would not have been able to apply all this makeup without her
Mr.
help,
Alice is sitting outside the door. Should I, because I'm going to need to be escorted downstairs because it's really dark in the hallway because my kids need to sleep in pitch black.
You need some sangria.
No, that'll cause some hallucinations.
Somebody asked if I saw The Skeleton Key. That is a great movie. That is a really good, really underrated movie. So, another one to check out. Well, Alice, I have enjoyed October as always with you. It's been amazing, especially this last episode.
Thank you for giving me some just regular crime for a lot of October. So those of you who checked out, you should check out the other 4 episodes in October because they're pretty much just straight crime. Tonight's thoroughly freaked me out. But you know what, for you, Brett? Once a year, I will go into Halloween mode for you.
I do have to say, those of you on Patreon who join us for the lives have already heard us record this episode. But next week's episode is pretty freaky, I think. It's one of those where what happens is so inexplicable that it sticks with you and you find yourself thinking about it. So it's not a Halloween episode, but it's one that probably could have been. But I look forward to the return of the 20% who will come back in November, and we've got a lot of great episodes lined up for the rest of the year. Getting ready to start a longer series. We're going to do a case. It's going to take a few weeks to do it, and hopefully you guys will enjoy that. But look, I mean, it's been a great October. I've enjoyed it. It's been a great year. I feel like, Alice, this has been an eventful podcasting year. I realize we're just in October, and so maybe we shouldn't talk about the year yet, because who knows what's going to happen the next 2 months. But this has definitely been something.
It's been a lot. I mean, in our personal lives, like I had a whole baby, and we have True Crime World is just like the gift that keeps on giving because, man, we started the year off with Murdaugh. We might end the year with Murdaugh. Who knows,
That's
right?
A good point. Yeah.
No, this has been a really, really exciting year. And it's kind of awesome, right? It's not like it happened overnight. We are literally going into year 4 of our podcast. It's been a lot of work, but I kind of feel like now we've built this beautiful community. You have really just settled into your Dracula-ness, and we're just kind of able to enjoy a lot of what we've worked hard to build, along with our favorite Dracula friends. I can't take you seriously right now, man.
I'm popping my collar now.
I know. That's not popping your collar.
Vampire collar.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We got to stop before you just really say something super weird.
Oh. No, this has been great, and thank you to all of y'all for joining us and sticking with us and having fun with us. We think this should be fun. I feel like some people just want to be depressed all the time, but that's not us. We think this should be enjoyable and this should be fun. You can take it seriously, and you can honor victims and still enjoy spending time with each other and talking about these cases, and we're going to continue to do that. So, all right, Alice. Well, I guess we'll sign off for now. It always makes me sad. I'm delaying this because it makes me sad when October ends. Happy Halloween to all of you out there. I hope you guys have a fantastic night tonight, and we look forward to seeing you in November next week, when I will not be dressed as a vampire.
But we start the Christmas movie recommendations.
There you go. It's time for the Hallmark Christmas movies to start. I don't even believe in Thanksgiving. Tomorrow is the beginning of Christmas for me. I can't wait. All right, Alice. Well, we'll be back next week in Christmas time with a new case, new questions, maybe new answers. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Whoa. Whoa. Today, I will be drinking wine.
Did you make a vampire cape for your wine?
Sangria from Vampire Wine. Not a sponsor, but they should be.
Oh my goodness. I don't
It's a nice
understand.
cape.
It is a nice cape. Did you make it? Tell me you sewed that. Tell me you learned how to sew.
I sewed it with my own two hands.
I'm gonna text your wife and make sure you're not having like a stroke.
Not sangria. Fangria. Okay. I suppose I should remove the teeth and look on a more serious effect for this very serious podcast.
Dive into true crime on Pluto TV. Unravel the mysteries with Forensic Files and 48 Hours. Investigate crimes with Dateline 24/7 and Unsolved Mysteries. With thousands of free crime movies and TV shows, Pluto TV is the true home of crime. Download the Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming true crime on live channels and on demand. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.